Hi, everybody, and hi, Alvaro. We're here with Alvaro Sousa, the designer of WarPlan.
How you doing?
So I want to introduce everyone who may not be familiar with it to WarPlan. WarPlan, in my opinion, is a great game, and a lot of people have described it as kind of a Panzer General went grand strategy. And while that's high praise, at the same time, I don't think it does it justice. And Alvaro, it was also your first Polish game, though you'd
hmm
previously worked on the Strategic Command series. So I also want to congratulate you. Such a great game right out the gate. So, in addition to being a great first war game, you've also been very responsive, very busy with updates for the community since release, which I think is also always excellent and a good indicator of success. Um, Now, from my perspective, having played around with it,
hmm
WarPlan looks great. It has an easy to use interface. It's very informative to the player. But it also has, and this is what I think really makes it stand out among some of the other grand strategy titles, it has a surprising depth of gameplay. And you've built in some very elegant mechanics to sort of bring that depth of gameplay in without overwhelming the player.
hmm
Now, a lot of wargamers at first glance might look at this and think, well, it's kind of a beer and pretzels grand strategy game because of that ease of accessibility. It has that sort of easy to access, easy to play look, but there's actually a lot more to it. There's a lot a player can do to customize his nation. There's a lot a player can do to customize his forces and the game strategy as a whole to his liking while staying within that historical framework of World War II. So I think it strikes a really good balance of strategic decision making and some more detailed choices all the way down to the individual unit level. So I'm curious, I guess, to start with here, what were your inspirations for Warplan?
Wow, that's a very big question. There's actually a bunch of little factors that were involved in this. My wife has been pushing me for 20 years to do it. Um, and I sort of got lucky with a bunch of little factors. Like, as you said, I worked with Hubert and Bill at
Hmm.
Fury Software, and they're just a bunch of great guys. I mean, they really got my foot in the door and got me to see that you can actually make money making war games. And I've been playing war games since I was 15 years old. And the way I learned war games was a friend of mine taught me Third Reich, and he taught me the hard way, which he basically taught me the game and then showed me where my mistakes were, but didn't tell me what the rules were. So that's how I learned, and it was pretty brutal. But after that, I'm like, this stuff. So I got
Yep.
into it. So I played pretty much every grand strategy game that you could play
Hmm.
um, in the 80s and 90s.
Hmm.
And so I picked up what people like, what people don't like. The other part of it was that my wife is a UX designer, a user experience designer. She has a master's degree in it. And
Hmm.
she taught me a lot about interfaces, user experience, cognitive psychology, how to design things. She actually helped me design the interface for it.
Hmm.
Um, and then I also play poker, and that's really where a lot of the inspiration from it for it came from. Poker is a game of skill with luck and a lot of critical thinking, abstract thinking, and deep thinking. So I dove myself into trying to understand exactly what it is about game design. I researched a bunch of stuff, and I realized that depth to a game doesn't make a difference. What you're doing is more important than complexity.
Hmm.
And so I went that approach for the game. Now, I be honest, I really rolled the dice on this because I created something that I'm like, I don't know if people are going to like it, if they're going to understand it, if they're, if it's too much, maybe I don't know. But luckily, it was a huge success. I will admit it's more based on World in Flames and Panzer General. So that was my favorite World War II game growing up. So I mean, all those factors inspired me to do it, and I actually enjoy it more than poker doing game design. And I wanted to give people just really a really good board game, a really good computer game that acts like a board game.
That's awesome. Well, first, let me say thank you, Mrs. Sousa. And also, yeah, you've covered a lot of ground that's familiar to me too. Third Reich was my first grand strategy game as well. Also a fan of World in Flames, um, and now a fan of Warplan. So let me ask you, when you look at, if you were to sort of think about an elevator pitch, if it were, just a brief summary that would explain to someone who hasn't played it before,
Mhm.
uh, where it fits compared to other games in the grand strategy war games genre, what do you think um, makes Warplan stand out?
I think that you can take the elements of a complex board war game like World in Flames or SPI's European Theater of Operations and let the AI do all the hard work for you.
Hmm.
So the player can focus completely on operational decisions, on strategic planning, and managing what he wants to do and planning it ahead of time. And it takes, it compared to some other war games, like for example, if you want to attack with 3 units to 1, you have to do about 8 clicks, 6 clicks. With mine, it's just basically 2. Select the unit, attack the enemy, and you can use another key to say, hey, select all these guys or hover these other guys to attack a bunch of other guys. You can set other units to do things automatically. The reinforcements are automatic. The technologies are automatic. Now, some players, they got a little bit hard to get used to it, but it turned out to be really good. I would often see people in the forums like, why can't I do this? Why doesn't this work? Why is he beating me? And they're like, wait a second, I'm going to try this next game. And so they try a different strategy, and they learn from that, and they just keep learning. And then I still play it. I'm the designer, and I figured I'd be burnt out by it, but I still play it with people online. And every game I play, I learn something new, and I want to try it. So that basically sums it up. So I think players will really, really enjoy the abstract nature of it, and then they could focus on being a real general instead of micromanaging things. And the rest just comes naturally.
I have to say that coincides with my experience with it as well.
Good.
I started out learning how to play it when I first played it, and playing it at a fairly superficial level. And the more I scratched the surface, the more depth I found, the more strategies I wanted to try out, and the more mistakes I realized I'd made.
Yeah.
As time went by, I was like, oh, I could have done that differently, and that would have probably worked out better. And I'm still trying out new things with WarPlan, and looking forward to trying out new ideas with WarPlan Pacific.
Have you played the multiplayer version, like where you play another person?
No, unfortunately, I'm still AI because of my schedule.
You have to do the multiplayer. That will give you the most enjoyment, and that's what people say is when you pit against another human and all the things they try to do or don't do. That's the biggest thing.
Oh, I concur. I hope to be able to do that soon.
Yeah.
So I guess we've talked about your inspirations and about where you think WarPlan does better. I guess one of the questions now, I want to pivot a bit to the development of WarPlan versus WarPlan Pacific, and talk a little bit about your experience. Once you made up your mind to work on WarPlan, the experience of developing that and how that process has evolved in the development of WarPlan Pacific, which is what we're here to talk about and focus on today.
Well, how can I put it? I guess I figured like I knew what a Model T was, and I tried to build a Ferrari. So for developing a game this large for a single person, it's as one review put it, it was a magnificent achievement.
Mm-hmm.
Getting all the ideas down, I had to relearn coding. I hadn't coded in 30 years, so I had to relearn how to do it. But trying to figure out all the game mechanics, and then going through testing and seeing what works, and then going through WarPlan and having hundreds of players playing it and telling me what they don't like and like, and then taking all those elements and figure out what I can do better in WarPlan Pacific. And then the scope of that game and how it's a completely different game. You try to add elements. I try to add elements to it that are very organic in how they flow. So it isn't something mechanical to use, where people figure out a sequence to do things in games. Do this in this order for the most efficiency. That's not what I'm trying to do. So for WarPlan Pacific, I came up with a lot of ideas, and I actually retrofitted them back to WarPlan. As part of the naval system to add a little bit more flavor to it. But in the Pacific, we're in alpha testing. The alpha testers, they love the game. They think it's great. We added some new mechanics to it and changed some of the rules that I think will make it a really good game.
All right, so we talked a bit about the process and the inspirations, but there are some wargamers who aren't really as familiar with the grand strategy subgenre of wargaming, who haven't really dipped their toes into it. They've been focused more on the tactical or the operational scale. And grand strategy really is its own unique subgenre because it deals with a lot of things that aren't purely military in nature. And I want to give players who have not played WarPlan or who have not tried grand strategy games a better sense of really what all the decisions and systems in WarPlan are about. So thinking about things like, your national level production and logistics, your research, your diplomacy, your upgrades in other areas. And I wonder, take as much time as you'd like, Alvaro, but I wonder if you would walk us through sort of in those different areas that cover grand strategy, what can a player do in WarPlan?
Production-wise, well, actually all the elements of the game, I focus on the most important aspects of the war. So, for example, in production, the two most important elements were steel production and oil production. So the game has a very simple element of production, which is production and oil. And the next most would be something like manpower. So you have all those three very basic elements. And I know that people are always saying they want oil and manpower, so I included them. So keep it simple, the three elements that you got to keep track of. Production really doesn't come into a problem for any side, but oil comes to a problem for the Axis. So they have to manage their oil. I always often get a lot of complaints about players like, I'm running out of oil, and everybody else is like, you're building too many tanks or too many planes, you're doing too much. So they have to balance what they have with like a historical feel for the game. So we'll go all over all the aspects of land, air, and war. So in the land war, a lot of the tactical games, it's one unit click, one unit attack, one unit click, one unit attack. In WarPlan, people can attack with multiple units at the same time. They can also have air support. So you could designate air units to be manual, where they only fly when you want to fly them, to do what they call air strikes to reduce the supply and effectiveness of a unit. Or you could have them do ground support, direct ground support for units. So when you attack, you select 3, 4, 2 units, you attack one, and the airplane goes along with you in ground support. So it makes it a very easy element for them to do land combat, just like a board war game, without all the complexities. And the cool thing, one of the things I like about it, is that the units have operation points instead of just move and attack. So you can keep moving and keep attacking as long as you have operation points. And of course, tanks have the most operation points. Armored units are one of the most critical elements of the game, but it also leads into the second most important part, which is supply. I focused a lot on logistics and supply in the game. The players have what they call logistics pool, which they can build any kind of unit and any numbers that they want, but different specialized unit costs more logistics. So you have to really balance your force and balance what you want to make. You can make a little bit more of something, a little bit more of another, but it's still a balance that you have to do. With the logistic pool, you also follow supply. So if you build fancy units like armor and aircraft, and you're trying to do, let's say, D-Day, you got to worry about port supply. So the Allies have a problem because they have to manage their supply landing on the beaches and getting to Paris and getting beyond. And I tried to make, like I said, everything organic in the game, where now Antwerp is actually a very important port, just like it was in the real war. This same logistics and supply system also goes with North African theater, because the Italians and the Germans have a limited number of ports that they can draw supply from. And the further you are from ports, the less supply you get. So that North African theater feels realistic to people, and there's a seesaw that goes back and forth. And there's people trying to blockade. Even Malta has an effect on supply because the planes there can interrupt supply. That's basically how the land and air system work. You know, the airplanes, you could do it on your own, or you could have them managed for you. With the naval system, I'd have to say that was the most difficult and probably the most unique system of the game. And I have to say that the beta testers, when WarPlan was coming out, really pushed the system hard because they wanted to do it well. And they gave me some really additional good ideas, which really put it over the edge. So I have to give them a round of applause on that. The naval system is a combination of text movement and area interaction. So it takes some of one game and some of another, and it puts it together. While the one thing that people complain about, there's no interception. There's no interception along the way. But this is based on the area that you're doing. Most naval combats were fought near a shore, not out in the open ocean. The only one I can think of that was fought in an open ocean was the hunting of the Bismarck, and that took half of the Royal Navy. So with naval units, you have 2 operation points, and you need at least one usually to do something. So you want to invade, you could like move once and invade, but you can't move like this long distance, just jump on somebody's capital. And as time has gone on, we've been adjusting the naval system because it's incredibly complex. Players can set fleets to intercept. So you could set a British fleet outside of Egypt and put it in what I call a fleet mode, which means it's patrolling and running around looking for the enemy. And if the enemy goes near you, you can intercept him before he gets to where he's going. There's naval retreat in that, where like if you damage them enough, they back up. So it's a large balance to make sure that when players move, they don't get ambushed completely. Like they move to an area and they get caught in a set of mechanics that the other player exploits and blows your fleet up or baits you. So it's very complicated to do it. We added two new elements to WarPlan Pacific that are, like I said, going to go back to WarPlan also. We had one issue where you allow air units to attack convoys, you allow air units to attack submarines, and carriers to attack submarines, and they were chasing down subs all the time. It's creating this micromanagement nightmare that nobody liked. So it took me actually quite a while, but I came up with a new game mechanic, and 3 of them actually that are being passed to Pacific, which is air units able to attack convoys, the sub hunter mission. Basically, it's not a real mission, but it's a way that you can use naval units, intuitively to help out escorts to defeat subs, and pursuit combat. We didn't have air units attacking convoys, but now we do. So we added another level to the escorts in combat. So in the escort convoy system, maximum of 10 escorts can be used to beat up a sub. No more than that. You can put extras, that's not a problem, but it won't do any good. And this is based on Michael Gannon's really good book, Black May, based on U-boat operations in the North Atlantic. But we had something special. So now with the air units able to attack convoys, now what I did is that you could add any number of escorts, and those escorts act kind of like as carrier escorts to damage the air unit. So now you have an element of decision. How many escorts you put in? You want to put 10, you want to put a few, you want to put more than 10 to defend like a certain convoy from air attacks, like the Arctic convoy. The sub-hunter element of it is that you basically take a carrier fleet or any destroyer fleets and you put them in a convoy lane. And what they do is they add a bonus to the escorts instead of just defeating the sub. So here you have you have 3 elements here, like if you're protecting against air, how many escorts you put in, and then how many sub-hunters that you put in the lane also to help the escorts, but it doesn't help you to put in a sub-hunter without escort. So it's a very, you have to make a decision based on abstract mathematics and decision-making where it isn't an exact sequence of events that you do to win. It allows you to use your critical thinking skills to figure out how you're going to defend a convoy.
You're shifting the probabilities.
Yeah, exactly. So, and this is where the poker part comes in. This is how poker works. So this is why these game mechanics works like that. Once I learned poker, it was my whole way of thinking about these games. The last element about pursuit combat, what was happening is players were chasing fleets all around the map and they were running away from them. So I added something new. Pursuit combat is that you can engage the enemy at the end of your naval move when you don't have operation point. It does a standard search, but all the damage is 50%, and it depends on the configurations. So if you have, let's say, person moving and a person at the location in fleet mode, an interception combat is fought by one interception fought first, and then a pursuit combat is fought. If the interception happens, the pursuit doesn't happen, and the interception combat is at full strength because the defender wants to fight you. He's actively looking for you to fight. But let's say you have the Bismarck running around the Atlantic that doesn't want to be found. Well, he's in what they call raider mode, which means I don't want to be found mode, and it lowers the chance of you finding him. But if you're in fleet mode, you could just do pursuit combat without worrying about interception. But let's turn over to the Pacific, and you have, let's see, Midway. You have your carrier force going in fleet mode. You have your transport force behind you in raider mode. They want to wait behind until you beat the American fleet. And the Americans try to come in, and let's say they want to get close and hammer the transport force. Well, they have to get past the carrier in fleet mode, intercepting them. So it
should be
really a complicated system, almost like chess with abstract thinking. That I think is really going to make a good element to the game. We have it in beta testing in the Pacific and beta test and open beta in WarPlan, and the players really, really like it. The most interesting aspect of WarPlan Pacific that we added was Intel, which took me quite a while to develop. So I think players will really like this system. Currently in regular WarPlan, we did Fog of War completely different. Most games were like you don't see the units unless you get close to them. And in WarPlan, as you know, you see all the units. Some people complained. Some people liked it. The system allows you to have an element of deception. So you could take up, for example, a bunch of beat up units, put them on the French coast, and the Allies don't know any better what they are. They have to actually attack them and look for them. But in WarPlan Pacific, we went one further. So the naval units are invisible if they are not within a reasonable, what they call detection level range. So whenever you have your own controlled land, you have basically spotters, coast watchers, seaborne airplane that look out for the enemy, right? So within a distance, they could see, oh, there's a fleet there. They don't know what it is, or there's a fleet there. But once you're beyond that distance, you don't see the enemy. So we introduced Intel. So Intel has an interesting dynamic that you don't know if your code is cracked. So you gain Intel points every turn, and of course the Allies will have a lot more than the Japanese. And you have abilities that you can do, like try to break the opponent's code, try to do increasing detection levels in an area so you can get an idea of what the fleets are. You can recode your encryption to reset it. Mm-hmm. So how this works along is that the player has to start making estimations and guesses. Like if it's the Japanese, you're basically going to be playing defensive because you can't outproduce the Allies in intelligence. So you'll have to time and build up points to recode your encryption so they have a harder time understanding where your forces are. And as the Allies, you want a time trying to crack their codes and doing a scan in their areas to find out where they are. So the Japanese, it's this mid-42, what are they doing? Do they have their fleet at Rabaul? Do they have their fleet at Truk? Do they have their fleet at Singapore? Mm-hmm. They're going for the illusions. You don't know. You use intelligence points to scan ports, scan an area, scan your own land nearby. You see a fleet. What is it? And you start picking up signals. Like normally it says enemy fleet unknown. But you do the scan and you get different levels. And it might say we're spotting 2 ships, or we're spotting 2 capital ships, or we're spotting 2 carriers or a transport task force. And it's going to be I think a very interesting element to the game, where it only adds to the level of deception in the fog of war game.
Yeah, it really sounds great, honestly.
We also added 2 other units to WarPlan Pacific: the light carrier and the patrol craft. And the patrol craft are basically, think of smaller vessels like PT boats to coastal ships. There's no actual designation for the size, but they're all smaller than destroyers. So patrol groups are now destroyer groups. And then the CVLs are the smaller aircraft carriers. And so why do we add CVLs? Because every capital ship in WarPlan Pacific is individual. WarPlan Europe, it was about 2 capital ships per county. It was appropriate for the game. But in Pacific, if I made like WarPlan, I think the testers would beat me up. I asked them, I said, do you want double ships or single ships? They're like, single ships. And they were demanding it. I was going to put it in anyways, but I wanted to ask their opinion. So people are going to get to see the Yamato sink, the Enterprise, Intrepid, any of the big battles, the Iowa. They're going to get to play with all of them. Yes, so in WarPlan, we had land specializations. In this one, we have air specializations and naval specializations. Mm-hmm. So like you could specialize a cruiser group to be a CLA, an anti-aircraft cruiser group, or you could add special, high research better, or we're more elite, or even the Japanese have a kamikaze specialization. So I think that summons up all the key elements. I didn't miss any.
Well, I've got to say, I think that players got a sense of what I was talking about from your explanations of the combination of depth and also some elegant design. I mean, just talking through some of the changes, the naval gameplay, and from the player's standpoint, this comes down to, once you understand the functions, you're switching between a few modes and you're managing your operation points, but the depth of the gameplay you get out of that and the possible combined operations that you can do, the possibilities become very close to precisely exact. You can cover pretty much every operation they actually did. One question I think which we didn't cover was and I know you mentioned it briefly, but I know if you want to stick to the more historical track, mm-hmm. You're going to play without the diplomacy. But yes. You do have a diplomacy system, and there is also a research system.
Yes.
And I just wanted to cover for players who are interested in that side of, playing the what ifs. And I know one of the things I actually like about WarPlan is that the research system doesn't let you go totally off the rails, but it is there, and it is there for you to still, exert influence on prioritization on what you want, which path you want to go down first. And could you just touch on those a bit more for the folks who are more into the what ifs?
Yes, the research system. Yes, you are exactly right in what you said. What I want to do, give players a little bit of an option to advance in some areas, but not overdo it to take a huge advantage on players. So maybe they might be a year ahead in one category, but a year behind in another category. I also tried to give options for every unit so they wouldn't be stuck. So that way they could switch. And I'll give a very good example. Like perhaps early in the war as the Axis, you want to take one type of technology called assault for the infantry, but then later on in the war, you want to switch to anti-tank technology for the unit. And you could flip it in the unit itself. And it basically represents a change in structure, more anti-tank guns, more assault guns, more defensive positioning.
You're redoing your TO&E and your doctrines. Yeah,
exactly. You're redoing your TO&E and your doctrines. That's exactly correct. You could do the same thing for aircraft. And there's little special rules that go along with it. Like for aircraft, they lose a little bit of experience, like a fighter pilot learning a new type of fighter. The naval units have even their own type of technology. And an interesting part of Pacific is that we added little itty bitty, I guess what they call immersive features based on technology. Like, for example, you could have warships in the battleships, or you could have heavy warships in the battleships. And you could already guess by those two titles what that represents. The warships would mean that the battleships are World War I older warships. And there actually is an element over there that they use less oil than the heavy warships, which are World War II type of warships. So example of a World War I type of warship would be the Congo or the Nevada, while a World War II type of battleship would be the Yamato or the Iowa, the newer ones that were built. Because as you know, they were using a lot of World War I battleships.
Yeah.
So these little details, and we also have, like, for example, bottom ships that now can't be moved out of port until they're fully repaired. These are little immersive things. So the research adds to that. One thing we did is, because I always like improving the game, is I took two research elements and combined them into one. So we had two elements about convoy escorts and air units attacking submarines, and we put them into one single technology called just anti-submarine warfare. Mm-hmm. So now planes and convoys use the same thing. We also added invasion technology, which what it means is that already the Japanese and Americans are at a decent level, but it makes it a little bit harder to invade. And once we go to WarPlan 2, that'll be part of the element of that. Once we design that game. So yeah, that's how the research works, and it's mathematically based, so people can't get too far ahead. You have a wide range of choices. I think aircrafts have 4 different choices with what they can do. Navals have 4 different choices. Yeah, it's people are gonna like it. They're really gonna like it. It's a good mixed system.
And then on the diplomacy side, which I think lets you go a little further off the rails, and this is a little more of a what if system, but
yeah,
it still requires the player, I think, to really, if they want to swing something in a way that it didn't go historically, they still have to really focus their efforts diplomatically pretty strongly on it. And I guess this is really for the what ifs, for the players who really like to explore an alternate World War II, right?
Right. It is for the what ifs. For the European game, I highly don't recommend it because there's too many little things that are aligned correctly, and getting one country or another that's big would just throw off the game. But how there are different kind of players, and you want to see if they can conquer the map and get Spain and Turkey on their side, or activate the United States early, whatever they want to do. So it's there to explore. For the Pacific, there's almost no diplomacy because everybody's pretty much at war except for the Soviets.
All right. Well, looking back on your experiences to date, and I guess this is where we'll close. And I hope everyone's gotten a pretty good sense at this point of what WarPlan's like and what the upcoming WarPlan Pacific is going to add to the mix. And personally, I'm looking forward to it a lot. But if you were talking to someone like yourself not too long ago, who was either thinking about, making a war game, getting into the war game development or design, based on your experience with your first game and now going on to your second, what would be your advice?
My advice would be this. First off, we're going to start with marketing. You can do marketing on your own, or you can get a really good publisher like Matrix Slytherin. I was very fortunate to find you guys.
Thank you.
It takes a lot of work to market a game, a lot of work. And the value of a publisher is immense. They support you, and you can see the difference in sales. People don't realize how difficult that is. You should spend a lot of your time on working on your game and let other people do some other parts. Now, as for, let's go to coding. the most important part about coding, and I was very fortunate because I have a friend that is a computer programmer. He's been doing it for more than a decade, so he's an expert at it. So we traded skills. I taught him poker. He taught me computer coding. But the most important element about coding is to realize that processors are unbelievably fast right now, and that you should mostly focus on making your code readable, because I learned that experience firsthand. When making WarPlan, I had to transition from thinking of a 1980s procedural way to program to object-oriented, and I also learned Unity engine. Took me a lot of man hours. So my code is not great, so it actually takes me longer to edit it. So when you are coding, learn proper coding procedures, data structures, how to organize your data better, make sure that your code is in a way that's very, very easy to use. That way you might save some time. Like if you just do it as you go, you might save some time early, but it'll cost you a lot of time later when you got to change code. If you do the work up front, you'll have an easy time changing code later. Now, the next would be user experience. Read some books, watch some videos on interfaces, cognitive psychology, how to build your game so the user has a very easy time to use it. And that is the most important part. And UX, user experience for computer games, is actually slightly different than applications. In applications, you want to make it as efficient as possible. But in a computer game, you need some element of doing, like just little things that you want players to do so they feel like they're actually working for what they're doing. I would say, yeah, that about covers it. Hire out some of your work. You can't do everything. Hire out artists, hire out composers if you need to. That's pretty much it. I think and start small. That's the last thing. Start small. If you start what I did, you'll be working on that thing forever. So it took me 6,000 man hours to code WarPlan and to come up with all the concepts. And that's from the very day I started learning Unity and relearning how to code to the day that it went on sale on Matrix. So start small with a small game, practice that, build up so you build up good practices for coding, for data implementation, for understanding how sound and game engine works. And then you can build up to larger and larger games.
Thanks, Alvaro. That is all very sound advice. And any closing thoughts you want to add on? Anything we've missed before we bring this to a wrap? Yes, I hope that you enjoy the new game. That's what I got to say. I always try to. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so I listen to my players and I listen to my users. And I have to say the players have been absolutely fantastic in their feedback. They've given me great ideas. Some of them developed scenarios. They've been really great on the forums, and I appreciate everything they have contributed to the game and all the ideas they come up with. And even if I don't agree with your idea or I don't think it's good for WarPlan, it still goes on my list. I agree. Our community is one of our greatest assets.
Oh yeah, no, the guys are all fantastic. They're all fantastic. I appreciate every single one of them.
We do too. Well, thank you for joining us today, Alvaro.
Thank you for the
We're
interview.
looking forward to working with you to get WarPlan Pacific ready for release in 2021, and wish you all the greatest success with it.
Thank you very much. You have a great day.
Thank you. Take care.